Welcome, folks. My name is Rudy Montoya. I am part of the Terra Prime team. And Terra Prime is a card-based conversation deck designed to add depth and meaning to conversations. From the classroom to the boardroom or the dining room, the deck uses beautiful artwork and thoughtful concepts to organize, enhance, and build discussions. So we're going to share some information about how you can get this card deck and more resources in the description below. But we are joined here today with Aine McCarthy.
Hey,
And so
just
thanks for
realized I'm
being
wearing
here.
a name tag.
Oh,
Good to be here.
so that people can remember. But yeah, if you want to share a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, great to be with you. I think we have a shared passion for cards of various sorts and getting into the deep end of conversations. I have Scorpio rising, so I like to do that in my free time. And I'm making a tarot deck with my friends. I'm excited to learn from you about your process. And I'm also kind of like serving an apprenticeship with the tarot deck, the classical cards, and like learning how to be a reader, and like kind of coming as I come to my own interpretations of each one. So it's a system that it's been fun to learn. It came into my life like 20 years ago, and I always just liked doing readings for fun with friends and never really understood how it worked and felt like I didn't need to. And now that I'm getting into it, it's kind of reconnecting me with my like ancestral lineage because I have Italian roots, and that's like part of where the tarot deck originated as we know it. And I feel like, white people are always stealing other people's practices and traditions. So it's kind of cool, like within witchcraft, find something that's kind of been lost from my own tradition and culture.
Well, I remember learning about your Italian heritage by seeing your decks and seeing some of the pasta elements. And I was like, oh, is that what that is? That's kind of quirky. And it opened up a whole new conversation, as cards tend to do.
Yes.
And so, again, we're going to be discussing Terra and Tarot today, talking about intersections, talking about themes. And again, for those of you who have experienced the Terra Prime deck and have already been putting it to use, we have a number of other podcasts and training tools to take a look at these wonderful cards that, again, are designed with these images on the front to get you started with topics and conversations, and a whole lot of information and resources on the back that are questions to think about, keywords, and really just ways to sort of jump off into conversations that way. So with that, I mean, I kind of want this to flow in whatever direction and however you would like to share. We can start off by sharing some of our favorite cards, or maybe even just talking a little bit about tarot and how you use it.
Yeah.
I think that there's conversations that I've had with folks about finding meaning, about reading, about divination, about some of those involve senses, some of those involve reading people. I understand that there's quite a bit of interpreting across cards to be had. And so maybe if you want to share a little bit about your process for that.
Thank you. What a fun question. I usually turn to the tarot when I'm looking for some insight or guidance. Sometimes like trying to get another perspective on the energy of a situation or the outcome of a situation. So like I recently did a reading that was 12 cards for the 6 months, the first 6 months of the year looking back, and the 6 months ahead. So it was kind of like a helpful way to like ground into like this turning point halfway through the year of 2023. And like it was helpful to like bring into focus looking back, like reflecting and kind of integrating like some of the painful lessons. And I think that's true for me generally. A spread I'll often go to is like past, present, future. And so it kind of like sheds some new light in the past, helps to make some meaning of it. But then when you're talking about future readings, for me, it's about like, what do I need to know now to help guide me into like this next step, or like what's helpful for me to start thinking about. So I don't look at it as super predictive because I think we're always in co-creation with like things in our life, or even with the cards itself, you can kind of have a conversation with them, even when we're talking tarot. So as I'm like learning to read for people, and the deck I have brought today is the Gentle Tarot. And I just really love the gentle approach, and like none of the cards need to be scary. Like some of them do reflect like painful moments, and I think that's kind of part of why they're a good mirror for like the truth of life, because like sometimes we're in a painful moment and it can be really validating. So I think yeah, I kind of turn to it as like a mirror of sorts of like, what do I need to know? What am I not seeing? What am I lying to myself about? And I find it to be really good at cutting through some of that, especially getting a reading from someone else so that you're not like interpreting it maybe the way you want to. But like as I get to know the cards, like they'll be honest with you. And I had one card that it's the Three of Swords. It's kind of a classic image of that like pierced heart. It almost looks like our like milagro in the Spanish colonial like iconography. But you know, it's not usually a welcome sight when you're like thinking about matters of the heart. You're like, oh, I don't want to be heartbroken. No thanks. And so I was like feeling this fragility around this card, like cringing. I don't want to see it again. I don't want to go through that again. I have all these past associations with it. And this witch that I've been studying with, tarot mentor, her name is Kate Fowley. She was like, she did a reading for, I said that based on a reading I'd already done for myself. Then she did a reading for me, and that was the card again. And she was like, this card is your friend, and it's coming up because it doesn't want you to be afraid of it. And like, how can you love this card? And that was facilitated a helpful like reframing for me of realizing like there's always so many layers to each card, I think, and they're like I mean, you've included so many layers. We need to talk about that, but I think with the tarot too, that's like each one can be kind of a portal or a key to like looking at things differently.
Well, yeah, layers for sure. I mean, I think I had an early perception that tarot was primarily divination. And so when comparing cards or thinking about this, how do you read that and understand it? And my current relationship to both tarot and Terra is almost like the relationship that one might have with a therapist. Like,
Yeah.
they're not there to give you the answer, to
Yeah.
tell you what to do, to tell you what's going to happen.
Yeah.
They're there to ask you questions and help you figure out your perspective. And as you do that, you unlock the answer yourself sometimes,
That's
or
so
most
true.
times. And that's kind of been a goal with this, or that's at least how I get the most out of my relationship with cards.
I'm so glad you said that, because I feel like part of the reason there might be some fear or superstition around this being like a negative tool, right? I think, or I don't know, something evil, I think is because it points us back to our own inner guidance and like trusting that, right? And that can be threatening.
Ooh,
with
yes,
spiritual institutions.
yes, it can. If it lives within inside you,
Yeah,
and you learn how to tap into your own energies
exactly.
and your own understanding, and what is the medium then?
Yeah,
Who is the medium?
yeah,
And what does that do to relationships?
exactly.
Oh, that's
Subversive.
big scope right
We're
there.
getting into it. Yeah. Yeah. And what I love so much, and I'd be fascinated to know if it's a good time for this conversation, like how you
Yeah.
chose the set of symbols in your deck, because I find them to be fascinating and wide ranging. And I love the reflection questions and keywords as I'm creating my interpretation of the tarot deck, but obviously going off of this system of 78 cards that like already exists. I am also kind of using keywords and questions for each one, because I think ultimately it's about, yeah, being a catalyst for growth, right? And self-reflection in our own journey. I also think conversation is an important piece of it as I'm like working with the cards with other people more, because especially if it's more than one, even if it's just one, there's a story there. And it's as I'm learning the meetings, I'm like learning how the cards together interact to paint a picture and tell a story. And but what's often more important than what I see is like what the other person sees, what images jump out, what symbols resonate. And so I'm fascinated with all of that.
Well, and there's again with Terra Prime, there are 28 cards in the deck. And I think in the creation of these, with some of the images, they were selected for the subject matter. And I think
Sometimes the
and
image came
sometimes,
first, and
yeah,
sometimes
and
the
sometimes the idea came first, and it
Ah.
was like, what matches, what fills this, what best
Yeah.
describes or explains this. And sometimes it came the other way around. Here's an image and here's an idea. What thoughts do we attach to that? And I think that's the great thing, is that that conversation can go through all those different directions. I mean, you could simply pick a card, use prompts and talk about it. You can pick an image, and I think just like tarot, the obvious or maybe more popular association to that image may not be what the subject matter is or what your thoughts are on it. And that's the great thing, is that then you actually start pulling out language, pulling out ideas, you start sharing them,
Yeah.
and you completely widen the scope, because now you're seeing somebody else's interpretation of them, saying, well, that's not my relationship. Again, maybe it was an image that was a little scary. Maybe it's one that
Right.
like, oh no, this is the card of death. Like, it could actually have absolutely nothing to do
Yeah.
with
I'm
that.
in the death card year in my life.
Oh, what does that mean?
So there's a few methods for this, but there's one like popular one where you can add up the numerology of the digits of your birthday to get a major arcana card as like a theme to work with throughout the year. And so for all of us, 2023, it's the chariot year, because 2 + 2 + 3 is 7.
Okay.
Chariot's number 7 in the tarot deck. So there's like themes there of like covering ground, picking up speed, momentum, and then also like all the metaphors that go with that. How do you keep fuel in the tank? How do you like not burn out and drive till the wheels fall off? Like, how do you care for the vehicle? All this stuff. What drives you forward? There's a lot there that I'm just been thinking about. But for me, based on the numerology of my birthday this year, it's the death card. So I had to face my fears on that one, and have been kind of working, seeing all the layers of that, right? And then going back to like people being superstitious, death is number 13. So realizing like there's so
Oh,
much
yeah.
power in that, and like reclaiming that, there's kind of like a sacred feminine maybe energy there, and like there's been a lot of full circle moments for me in the year so far, and some like grief too, but that's life, right?
Yeah. Well, I didn't realize that. And that's the thing about like numerology,
Yeah.
or again, words, images. I think there's a translation to association,
Yeah,
and it can lead you down the rabbit hole,
totally.
which is kind of part of the goal,
Yeah,
because that's how you explore. It's not just going to pop in your head. You have to make the walk before you reach a different perspective
right.
or a different understanding, especially if it's with somebody or with a group of people. Um, and so I mean, I imagine even right now we're creating something that's unique, and the combination of the two of us is very different than the combination of anyone else, because we carry
Right,
our perspectives and those ideas.
right.
Um, yeah, and the association, the numerology, I don't know too much about how that works. What I like about the concept or the idea is patterns.
Totally.
I am mostly a visual artist, and so I think the recognition of patterns is where I find pleasure, but that can happen in numbers.
Yeah.
And it's interesting the way that people do that, or look at things like combining that to come up with a separate digit that then you can impose on a pattern, like a popular card, that
Yeah.
maybe then you can
Right.
start finding some renderings of meanings.
Yeah. Cool.
Big can of worms right there.
Totally.
Do you wanna pick a card and
Yes.
start off? We could go at random. I know that there's one that you were thinking of that we can.
Yeah, let's do both.
Okay.
Yeah, I was really fascinated with the Labyrinth and Obelisk card. These themes of nationalism, memory, and forgetting. I feel like if you didn't ask this, but if there was like an analogous card in the tarot deck, I feel like it might be the Emperor. Like looking at like how do we structure our lives? How do we build worlds? Like authority figures. What does all that mean? Those aren't quite the themes here, but nationalism, materiality, nostalgia. This is fascinating. Memory, forgetting. I want to ask
Yeah.
you about it, and then I have thoughts. But
Okay.
how did this one come about?
Well, and the design of these cards actually came from Dr. Manuel Montoya, who is my brother and the primary, again, lead of the Terra Prime team. We should probably have a session with him and suss that out a little bit more. I came to this project as he was developing it,
Mhm.
And which is, again, how I can say where the images and the context came from, is a professor at the University of New Mexico, and was already using these ideas in the classroom. He was showing images and he was asking questions, and it eventually led to creating this as a tool to jump on board with that. But the answer as to how he paired those things up is a separate session that we'll host with him when we get a chance.
Oh, good idea. Okay. So these questions of, do we build monuments to remember or forget? Is nostalgia a form of collective memory? Fascinating. What does
Yeah.
this make you think about?
Nostalgia and collective memory. For me, it's perspective
Mhm.
again, and it's matching worlds. And when I find myself a little bit weary from our current world,
Yeah.
and I reflect and think about other times and what was different, things that, and it could be like triggers that are music. And I find that there's a certain craving for nostalgia. And that could be music, it could be food, it can be a space, it can be a temperature. But I frequent spaces and memories. And in conversation, I find that there's a lot of people that have shared nostalgia for things.
Mhm.
I mean, and right now, again, there's millennials that are sharing tons of tweets and memes
Oh my God,
about
totally.
all of those shared nostalgia moments.
Yes, it's so comforting.
It is.
Yeah.
You have a shared experience and you think, wow, it wasn't just me, it wasn't just me and my siblings or me and the people that I grew up with. This is someone who I didn't know in childhood, and they
Yeah.
had the same kind of vibe, that they were like riding bikes out in the summer and you didn't go home at night, or you were drinking from the garden hose, and now younger generations are like, why are you talking about this?
Yeah.
Um
I had to
that
explain who the Spice Girls were the other day, so I feel you. I know that one hurt.
oh,
That one
it
hurt.
does hurt. um Nostalgia,
Yeah.
perspective, shared experience. And so, in thinking about monuments, how you remember those things, how you memorialize those things, I I think there's some attachment. And so then it makes me want to like switch lenses and look at things that I don't have an attachment to.
Mhm.
And I come across art, sometimes things that maybe not art,
Mhm.
that I don't have a connection to or I don't understand. But I try to be careful about not dismissing something because I don't understand it.
Yeah.
Um, why is it there? How did it come to be? It's not like I roam around the earth thinking that deeply about everything all the time. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of moments when I come into physical elements or even not physical elements and don't have a connection to it. Think, oh, okay, that's rad, and I'll let it pass. Or wonder what that was about. That music, that song, those notes, that time, um, what it means to people. I mean, and there's a lot of really deep meaning that
Mhm.
happens in a lot
Mhm.
of, um, especially in objects. And we think about how cultures are built and represented and the kind of energy that they carry.
Mhm.
And there is energy that's carried because people keep traditions through some of those things.
Right.
People keep feelings, they remember, and it's not just good things. People remember good things and they remember bad things. We are still fighting over good, bad, right, wrong, what's was fair or unfair, didn't serve or served
Yeah.
people against one another. And there's a lot of energy, and people recognize that they feel that energy.
Mhm.
Well, there's significance to that.
Yeah. Cool.
It, again, down the rabbit hole.
Well, yeah, into the labyrinth, down the rabbit hole.
That's also it.
Yeah. I would show you, but I don't want to scandalize your audience, and I'm wearing a leotard anyway, but I have a
Okay.
tattoo of a labyrinth right here.
Oh,
And it's been a touchstone symbol throughout my life, and I kind of think about it, or this makes me think about it in a new way, which is why I love this card. But I think about it in terms of like, us as humans on the earth, like little ants in an anthill, like what kind of mark are we leaving? And what does that say about our collective consciousness? And like, I make a distinction between labyrinths and mazes. A labyrinth being a a maze like with no dead ends, no forks in the road. So it's still
Okay.
circuitous and winding, but you follow the path in, takes you around some turns to the center, and you travel the same way back out, you retrace your steps. And so for me, I learned kind of like to labyrinth walking as a spiritual like centering practice, as a way to kind of take on a contemplative stance, which I feel like is what you're doing in so many ways with this. Like, take a step back. What, like, if you feel dizzy on the labyrinth, where else in your life do you feel dizzy? Where else do you feel like you're making a lot of transitions, or frustrated that someone in front of you is walking slowly? Like, any of those things can be like invitations
Yeah.
to further reflection. So it's been a really useful tool for me. And I think it kind of is a paradigm too, right? Of like, you can't get lost. There's no wrong path. You're not like, you can make your own metaphor out of it, but like, you're not going the wrong way. You're gonna get there, right? You can slow down, but you're not gonna like fall out of life. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think when I think of labyrinth and mazes, I worry about getting lost.
Yeah.
I worry about getting lost before I get hopeful about finding something.
Yeah.
And it's actually kind of uplifting to hear you use it as a tool
Yeah.
to potentially find something, even if that
Right.
something is a different part of yourself or
Totally.
a different frame of mind.
Yeah. Well, in like so many of the constructions we've made in our society, like our mazes, right? Like, people do fall through the cracks. Like, there are dead ends built in. And so like, how do we create a different paradigm or create different structures for ourselves? I think that's interesting. I also, this is the overlap in the Venn diagram between the decks we're involved in creating. Because so in the one I'm working on with my friend, we have the labyrinth on, and specifically, it's going to be the high desert tarot, so it's like images inspired by the landscape here. And there's a specific labyrinth at Ghost Ranch in Abiquiu that's on our Wheel of Fortune card, and that's the card that's like, you know, breaks, breakthroughs, kind of like twists of fate, karma, destiny. Like, things are spinning, you don't know which way it's gonna land, you don't know which way's up. So it can feel like that in the labyrinth, like you say, like, you don't know where you're heading, you kind of can't see which way's up. But approaching those moments in life with some of that trust, I think, is like a helpful maybe message of that card, or reminder from
Yeah.
time to time. Is there a significance to the numbers in your deck?
Not necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Part of why we made them numbered is for reference, because there's a number of ways that you can use this deck. And so
Yeah.
if you look at each card, there's a number, there's a title for each one. There's a theme for each one that's listed on the bottom. And then there's different notes about activator, veils, reflect and affirm, depart and clarification. And so we have an entire guide online of different ways that you can use this.
So brilliant.
Really, my favorite way of using this is pulling a card and just going with it. Let's have the journey and have the conversation, because you can keep going. Sometimes you walk in circles, and sometimes you can lay cards on top of each other and says, well, that has a direct connection to this card over here. And you start building a pathway of conversations. But it doesn't always happen naturally like that. And so we designed them so the numbers don't necessarily give a value as significance as much as the order for reference, I think, to be able to talk about it. But I think because of that, there are different ways that you can connect with people and have that structure. And I know that there are a lot of tarot decks that give you that support and structure to say, hey, you pulled this. Here's a way that you might read it if you pull it in this context or in this way.
Totally.
And sometimes that might be upside down, right side up, in a particular order, in a particular section of asking. I don't know too much about the patterns, but I've known people that pull cards in 3s and 12s, that make stacks that cross them over each other.
Totally.
And when you do that, you're able to read them differently.
Yeah.
With these ones, with Terra Prime, it's more about the interaction and how you can balance out, because it's easy for the two of us to kind of navigate this. But if we were in a much larger group, what would that be like, with people just choosing cards instead of having more of a round table jumping out? Let's have an opportunity to challenge. Let's have an opportunity for people to be able to put these in sections of reflections and line them up in different ways. So that's how this is broken down. So it's more than just a conversation prompt. It's sort of built that way with almost an infinite way of being able to use them.
Wow. That's super cool. Should we pull another one?
Yeah, actually, I hadn't really thought of one. I was going to tell myself that I was going to think of one before we started having this conversation and recording. And kind of just moving through the deck as you had it arranged, the one that popped out as an entire figure was the automaton. And this one has been on my mind, and I'm pretty sure we have an actual separate podcast to talk about this
Okay.
in the context of artificial intelligence.
Oh yeah, totally.
But this one's
that False Face Society. That seems relevant as well.
it does. There's a whole connection, and again, a whole way that you can lay these on top of each other. But the connection that I think of, again, if I'm trying to keep things in a little bit of a Venn diagram and connect the dots of Terra and Tarot, is about where do thoughts come from, and who's making them, who's thinking, how are you thinking, what happens when you change the way that people think, and when you insert something like artificial intelligence. And entire industries in our world now are scrambling right now to figure out what the implications of that. People, again, are studying why someone would rather let artificial intelligence make decisions for them instead of having to place that upon themselves. Why is there a desire, okay, reproduction and cheap labor for generating images, stories, ideas? How much can it actually do? How much is it worth? And how is it impacting people? But I'm going to read from the sort of the overview of it. Is civilization consistently struggles with the desire to do less while getting more. We have a strange relationship between labor and leisure. Furthermore, there is an inherent dignity in human labor that is the basis for most of our economic and political struggles. The value of our work affects us at the cellular level and at the societal level. What happens then when we find a way to automate what once took a great deal of work and effort? Use this card when you think of a topic that contains the problem of automation. I do think that doing things by hand of yourself, using your brain, it affects who you are. I like to paint. Is one of the things that brings me joy. Sometimes I'm good at it, sometimes I'm not. Really trying to separate myself from this capitalistic idea that you have to be good at something or tie it to some other value besides your pleasure that's associated with it. And the more I separate those two, I think the more I enjoy myself, and quite honestly, the better I do. But it's very physical for me. It requires that I have a brush and a paint and a canvas and maybe a glass of wine or something like that. But doing that actually makes me feel like I'm being myself. I'm engaging my imagination, but I'm engaging my body and participating with it. And so I do think that it affects us at different levels. And so creating something digitally can still use different elements of yourself. Creating something with artificial intelligence, how much further are you stepping away from the process, from participating in it as a human? But on the conversation of, again, labor and leisure and how much we like to do, when I think of tarot, and that's that I have a very limited experience with it, I think a lot of sort of unknown, like, I don't know, maybe pop culture references, or maybe references where people share this mystifying idea about what it is and how you approach it. And maybe a common theme for people who want to approach it as a way of getting to an answer quicker. I've known people who are like, I need to have someone read my cards, or maybe I should have someone read my cards and help me figure out what this is. And it's not necessarily with the goal of I want to connect with someone and go through the journey to find a perspective. It's I want someone to tell me the answer. I've tried a number of different ways and I need a more direct route. And again, sometimes it's a route through automation, And sometimes people think that the route is divination. And I don't necessarily agree with that. Like I said earlier, I think, and I think the same thing about, again, like I compared it to a relationship with a therapist and working around your perspective and finding your way to an answer rather than having someone tell you what it is. I've often thought about the same thing about prayer. Granted that I'm quite removed from organized religion at this
Sure.
point, but I always used to think about that and prayer as the way that a lot of people use it as a question and answer, a request and a give as part of that.
Yeah.
I never necessarily believed that. I think I didn't want to believe that because I didn't want unfulfilled expectations or promises or those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And so eventually I came around to this idea that it was, for me at least, an internal request for perspective. I'm not asking you to do this, asking you, deity. I'm not asking you to give this to me per se. But if by asking I can think through it and come to an understanding of it, if I come to the understanding of it, that's a gift for me. And so in that case, I've then asked and I've received, but I've worked out my own little process to wrap my mind around it without necessarily needing to include another person or a divine element. That it's a little bit more internal, and yet it's not, because sometimes putting an energy does require a little bit of faith.
Totally.
And putting energy interacts with other energies.
Yeah. It's vulnerable to ask, and it's like a creative act in itself, and then you're focusing the mind around receiving answers, and things start to stand out in the patterns, right? That's pretty cool to think about.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've experienced that or if people have approached you in that way, or what your experience has been about people's perceptions of tarot, what it does.
I think that's such a good point, and something I'm definitely starting to make observations about, that like, well, first of all, you can misuse any system, right? Any system, any spiritual tool can be like used as a weapon or like trivialized and the nuance is lost, right? Like I feel like this is happening on my Instagram feed a lot right now, where people are using sun signs in the zodiac to just be mean and like stereotyping, and then like sometimes it's funny and I get a kick out of it, but sometimes it's not that helpful, especially if it's like new to you. You're like, like I heard folks saying this recently, why did they ask me my sun sign? I already feel judged, I just met someone, you know, like this is not meant to be a tool to make us feel worse about ourselves. And I do think sometimes there's a desire to like, I feel it myself, certainly a temptation to like offload agency, like someone just tell me what to do, right? Like follow the path. Like we have decision fatigue, right? So
offload agency. I'm gonna write that.
let's write it. Like, and there is something to that, especially with these themes we've invoked, right? Like, I don't know, and the Emperor card is very much an authority figure, right? And maybe there is comfort in that sometimes. Someone else tell me what is right. I don't know where to turn. Maybe especially if we're like, if it's not clear, we need structures to fall back on to hold us or guide our decisions or something. But I think that the tarot doesn't let you off the hook for that. There's never like, to me, it's not clear answers, especially if you're looking for clarity and you don't have it. It will often reflect that internal conflict and kind of point you back to your own agency to make a decision. And it might give some guidance around like the outcomes of different paths. But it's still going to be up to you to like own. And we're always in collaboration, right? Even if you do believe, which I tend to, that we have like karma, we have our psychology, right? We have our inheritances of all the lineages that like feed into making us who we are. And you get to co-create with that. And those are the cards you get to play with, right? Like, so I think it's always like, there's always choice. And I think good astrologers, good spiritual guides always point you back to that. And I work with the tarot in that way, I think.
Well, what I like about choice and about tarot is that, again, it's not going to tell you, but by revealing images, patterns, thoughts, words, concepts, and structures for interpreting those concepts, you might have an attraction or a revelation, which reveals a preference, which can reveal a decision.
Yeah.
And that's a little way of walking towards,
Totally.
well, I asked it and now I'm going to decide this. Okay, for better, for worse, for
Yes.
I don't like to think of things anymore in terms of right or wrong or good or bad.
Exactly.
Is it skillful? Is
And
it not? Is it,
right.
does it serve you?
And going back to the labyrinth, it's like there's no wrong path, right? Like you can't fall off of your life. Like, you know, like you can just, there's always learning and growth no matter what you choose. And yeah, I had an experience, well, because I'm like relatively new to giving readings to strangers and people I don't like know their context that they're coming to the cards with, but I'm finding it fascinating. I had this dilemma early on where someone, like, she was asking about whether she should take a trip with like a relatively new love interest, and my interpretation of the cards was like, kind of don't. Like, I think I was like, if you can, I think you should take this trip alone. And then I felt the residue of like, that didn't seem to be the answer she wanted. And so she wanted to pull more cards to like kind of get a different answer, which is a very common temptation,
Yeah.
which I do myself, like, well, show me something else. And I was struggling with like, when is the reading complete and how much like how much of my perspective on what this is saying do you really want to hear? And you know, you kind of have to decide for yourself how much you want to know and like all that. Not a very satisfying reading. Didn't feel like we ended in like a agreement about like, okay, you know, it was more like, and she was like, saw her months later and she's like, I took that trip by myself and I've never traveled by myself and it was transformative and I dumped the person now with someone else. I'm like, oh, okay. So like, it's a chance to wrestle with our own, right? Like motivations and conflicting priorities, and it can crystallize like a choice point.
Yeah. Well, it also, I think, because there's not a direct way that it gives you an answer, you're kind of forced to be honest with yourself.
Yes.
And to continue to pull cards. I mean, I've done that before. I will, there are moments when I'm going to seek the advice of someone because I know that they're going to agree with me, and then I'm justified.
Totally.
I am not going to ask the person who I know is going to disagree with me making this choice,
Yeah.
because somewhere inside I might already know what the choice needs to be.
Right.
Um,
Right. Like flipping a coin,
and
right? In the
potentially,
air, you
oh,
decide what you want. You realize which one you want it to be.
oh yeah. Well, and how many times have people done that and said best 2 out of 3?
Yeah.
Usually when you get to that point, you already have a decision
Uh-huh.
that you've made. If you want to justify it with a coin or a card,
Yeah.
or the advice of a neighbor,
Yeah.
having close friends that will support you. Oh, yeah, that's a definitely interesting approach that people have to it.
Mhm.
I like, what stuck with me also is that you're talking now about how you're interacting with people that you don't know. Could you share a little bit about
Yeah.
how that's different
Yeah.
when you have context of somebody, knowledge of somebody?
Yeah. Like I think my friends tease me because I hold back my reactions a little less with them. They'll pull something and I'll be like, oh shit. Because I'm already like
Yeah,
reading into how it applies to a certain situation. But I always still try to like back up and make room for like, what does the other person see? Because I think that can have equal value. And um like there's a mystery in it that I don't ever claim to like fully know or understand. And like they're only impactful in the context of someone's life. So I think the more that someone shares, I find like the more specific the interpretations can get for me. So if like it's a really cold reading, like I might have general theories, but I have no idea like what it's pointing to. Like the suits in the deck will kind of indicate, they have implications in terms of which areas of life they're about. So like the cups cards are usually about emotions and relationships, and the swords are about mindset. The wands are like passion and creativity, and then the um pentacles or discs, or you know, earth element suit is like about material life and like what we value and how we value ourselves. And so I'll get like hints from that, but like the big major arcana, they're like huge spiritual lessons that have implications in like every part of life. And so there's like major themes, and then like it's always interesting to see where that's showing up in someone's world, I think.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. In the Terra Prime deck, I've had only a couple of opportunities to interact with the cards and people who I don't know. I think I have a tendency or have used these cards a lot more with folks who are in my circle, whether it's friends, family, working circles, and kind of experimenting and playing and having a moment like this. But on that note of kind of revelations, I like picking where Varney of London is parked over here is number 27, The Revenant, Varney the Vampire. There was a moment when I realized that I was in company that we didn't know too much about each other, and there were a lot of cards that were coming up that were, I think, more congenial and had maybe more common associations, and we weren't getting very far with this one. And I pulled this one out to talk about decay, ugliness, and contempt. And people started having very strong reactions like, ooh, or oh. And it was, okay, now we're getting somewhere. Now we can see that the oil and the water have a little bit more separation.
Yeah.
And you can see what the boundaries are a little bit more, and you see where the lines are. And you can stretch it, and you can ask more questions that are, again, they're on a little further on the scale than they were before with some of those congenial ones.
Yeah.
And this one, read a little note from this one, that we tend to hide the things that we think are ugly. Theologians and philosophers throughout history have connected morality with notions of purity. If cleanliness is godliness, then what does that tell us about filth? In extreme cases, people use filth as a way to provoke others. In the 19th century, a cult of the ugly emerged to challenge the notions of purity and power. Punk rock is another version of this logic. One of the things that we are sure of is that our bodies will eventually decay. We spend most of our lives denying this truth or concealing what happens when our bodies betray us. Yeah, and aesthetic difference, even just thoughts about all sorts of different concepts and beliefs, where we are in our world, where we are as humans within ourselves, what we feel about natural processes and things that we want to happen, things that we've accepted, things that we don't want to happen. What happens when you are thinking, again, this one's a good one, thinking about bodies, thinking about your own body and how we operate and have visions of what we could be, should be, and what that does to people's entire world.
Yeah.
Versus how you make those understandings and agreements with yourself on who you are and your acceptance. It's a long road.
That's good.
For most of us.
Reminds me of two things. One, the devil card in tarot, because there's always like something you're not seeing with that one. Sometimes it's like it usually comes as a reminder that like you're freer than you think you are, but it's also fun to think about like what's bedeviling you, where does the sense of humor, like what can you laugh about, what can't you, what are you hiding from, all that stuff. But I don't know if you or your brother have had experience using these like in our shared UNM community, but I think it would make fascinating icebreakers for some of these big meetings that we end up in where like people don't necessarily have rapport, but there is some buy-in for like a structured conversation. So it might be a fun place. We should experiment with that.
Oh, I think we should.
Yeah.
It goes a lot further than what ice cream flavor are you with?
Right. Well, it reminds me of my colleague work wife Michelle is like a queen of icebreakers. But one of the best ones last year, she had some, and it reminds me of this card also, she had some pigeons laying eggs on her balcony. So she was joking that she was like co-parenting some pigeons for a while. And the icebreaker was just thoughts on pigeons. And it was wildly polarizing. People have such strong feelings of disgust and then like such affection. And it was just ran the gamut. You learn so much about
it's beautiful. You get to learn so much about people when you throw something like this into the mix.
Yes.
I mean, the concept, decay, ugliness, and contempt. My brother and I watch a lot of horror movies.
Oh.
And that's, again, we were talking earlier about shared experiences and nostalgia. I think there's something that lives in there also. Um, One of the reasons that I think sometimes I push myself um, in that film genre is desensitization,
Mm,
like a safe way to test a lot of my fears, like
yeah,
watching
good.
clown movies like this, but still doing it. And I think eventually, like embracing some pretty obscene images and concepts has had me return to the world and readjust my perspective on what that actually means,
Mm,
what is, again, good or bad, or the good or evil in the world, um, what's really kind of obscene and out there versus, uh, I guess, some of the perspectives and spectrums and spaces that people operate on that I think are kind of fixed on what should be, what shouldn't be.
yeah.
And it translates to almost everything about how a person is and how they operate in this world, how you view and see yourself, how you treat
Mm,
your body and people around you, and families and cultures, and things that do that are absolutely shocking and bizarre to other people. And some folks can get themselves to a frame to step back and respect it. And sometimes we, as a society, decide that we need to meddle and put rules on a lot of those things and
yeah. Oh, bless.
um,
Mm, mm-hmm,
take away agency
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
because we have concepts that we need to stick to. That
mm-hmm.
this is it.
Yeah,
Uh, and it's not. And so you bring out some of these things,
right.
and you really get to test and see where people land.
That's right.
So and that's useful. It's powerful and it's useful.
Yeah.
Um, and not. I mean, if you're thinking about it for a positive way to be useful, knowing where people are in terms of perspectives and where you
Right.
stand and how you can work with people, how you can continue to operate with people in your spaces and in your world, having that much more information about them and having that much more information about yourself.
Yeah.
It makes a difference in how you can proceed and you can still be, how you can still connect and how you can still
Totally.
build. It doesn't have to be a thing that, okay, now we're on opposite sides of this understanding.
Right.
We're on the opposite ends of pigeons and we cannot exist in a world, and we're both going to fight until we agree that my perspective is right and should be law of the
Yeah.
land, versus how you operate letting people be on their
Right.
respective position on pigeons.
Totally. Well, it's like I think self-knowledge is always good, right? And this is part of what this is about because it's such a weird thing about being a person. Like you can't really know yourself 100%. Like we're mysterious, right? To ourselves.
I like that.
Yeah, I think so. And like we were just having this conversation in a staff training, like in the sense of surfacing unconscious biases, right? That's such important work, especially for like anti-racism and all the isms. But like we can't know all of our biases, right? They pass us by. So I think opportunities to kind of see them and notice them with curiosity is like such useful information.
Oh yeah, curiosity.
Yeah.
That's another good one.
Mm,
What is the saying? Curiosity is the cure for boredom. There is no cure for curiosity.
that's great.
I hold that one with me. I
I
very
see
much,
that for
I
you.
very much value curiosity.
Yeah, down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. If you could be anything, be curious, because that's going to be the thing that helps you open doors and
Yeah,
keep going and learn.
such a good stance. I love it.
But I want to talk a little bit about talking about these card decks as objects of beauty.
Yes.
Um, Again, I'm a very visual guy, so looking at them is just nice. And I feel the same way about tarot.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that might be a contributing factor to why there are so many types of tarot decks. Like I've seen
Yes.
thousands. I've been to stores where there are shelves full of them, bookstores, metaphysical shops. Regal was one of them, that
Yeah.
they have an entire case and there's like 80 of
Mm,
them there. And
totally.
I keep thinking about some of the ones that I want to buy, and actually not necessarily because I plan on using them as tarot decks, but I find them beautiful.
It's such a
Um,
good point.
Musings, the images and the way, again, even the cards that have sort of a common theme or place,
Yeah.
in tarot, but I mean, you're designing one, you use several.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like not unlike the labyrinth that we talked about earlier, I feel like tarot's like in a resurgence moment, which is fascinating too, and what that says about like our collective consciousness. But there's such value for me in seeing different um imagery, different interpretations of the classical symbols and like fresh new images because it adds layers to the meaning, right?
Mm.
And I think it's like a way of seeing yourself in it. Like I used to really the one of the classical decks that's often kind of like still widely circulated is the Rider Waite Coleman Smith version. And Pamela Coleman Smith was like a fascinating witch that made the imagery on that deck. Um, and so I've come to appreciate it and all the symbology in that. But when I first saw it, I was like, that is creepy. And I don't like that it's like all white people. And like, you know, like I don't tend to read with it because I think some of the images are scary and overused, maybe. I like, I'm drawn towards, and the deck that I'm making with my friend has no human figures on it. It's animals and landscapes. And that is also true of the Wild Unknown deck or series of decks, which is like created by this person Kim Kranz, and like I really I kind of like learned the cards on that deck because I liked it for the same reason. So I think there's just like it's I love seeing proliferation that's like happening, and for me I'm kind of I'm finding that if I don't use a deck I like to pass it on to people because I think there's like certain ones that it feels really good to shuffle and it feels good to like, and I like showing the images to people. And there's others that I just kind of learn from the interpretation and I like to keep them in circulation if I can. But then there's oracle decks, and so I can't help accumulating those
Right.
because they're all different.
Same thing happens to Stephen. We were at a tap room the other day that we have a tendency to enjoy taking things from the bookshelves and then repopulating them. Except where like games and cards are concerned, we're like, no, these need to live here. But he found like a goddess deck that he was really attracted to. I was like, okay, let's see if we can get that. I'm like, it's in the mail, thanks 2023. You can now play with it at home and when we come back to this space. Yeah, no, it's
That's
I like
cool.
the idea of recirculating those sorts of
Yes.
things and enjoying something and letting it have a life and kind of fly down the path. I mean, and in terms,
Sprinkling them like little seeds.
I'm curious again, there's about what people go through when they design something, how much energy that carries of a designer, an artist, a person behind a project when you pick up the card and you either read it yourself or you read it to somebody else. It could be another person in the room entirely or another team of people. I mean, the part of the goal with this is that this blueprint deck was designed to kind of share this tool, but also the sales from the blueprint deck are something that we're saving to be able to make the artisan deck. And so our goal again is to take these themes and these concepts. That's another one where the relationship's going to change. It might change to them, and engage 28 local artists to come up with their original rendition of it.
That's brilliant.
With them each getting sort of a percentage stake in the deck as well. And I mean, I think I understand the concept. It'll be really something to see 28 different people each taking something and seeing, I don't know, what the parameters that we want to put on that or not, and seeing what comes of it. They, I imagine, are going to be wildly and vastly different in style, in ideas. And because of that, those cards will carry at some level a person's interpretation. So you carry that person and their history and their story with you when you read that card.
Totally.
The same way when you look at a photograph or a painting, look at a picture and you're like, well, even if it's a landscape and you're like, well, it's not just the landscape. There's two people in that picture. There's the photographer and there's me.
I'm so glad you said that. That revealed a bias to me that I hadn't realized I had, which is that I really love knowing why a deck creator picked the symbols that they picked. And so I've had decks that I thought the symbols were really fun and cool, like one that had like pop culture figures from the 90s on every card. But I was like, but why did they pick this person with this card? And there was no written explanation. It was like too frustrating for me. This deck, that's one of the things I like about this book. And it when she originally published it, it just came with like a tiny little booklet, like many decks do. And then this expanded book has a section for each card about art symbolism and why the images are there were chosen. And I just love that. Yeah.
Well, from that, does it give you more context and meaning, or does it guide and take away some of the openness for how you read it? Do you, or how, I guess, how well do you carry
Yeah.
that idea?
That's a good question. I think it's been useful just to know like, oh, if there's because it's a unique interpretation, if there's like a plant, to know what plant is that. And then I can like go down the rabbit hole of like the plant symbolism and see how that fits, or like what animal is that, or what landscape is this an image of? And how does that fit with like the classical understanding of the card, or like just one understanding of the card? And it's always just, yeah, puts that signature on it. Like this is one person's interpretation. Sometimes for personal reasons, like there's personal stories in some of the images. And I love it, just adds another layer to me.
Well, and for me, what I like about that, another one of the layers in there is a connection.
Yeah.
Maybe a connection to someone who you don't know.
Yeah.
That now you do, because you
Right.
have an intimate experience of their cards, of what they mean to you, and all of a sudden somebody's
Totally.
put something from themselves into a card deck, and you continue to put your handprint on that, and then you continue to do readings and share that with people.
Yeah.
I value connection a
Yeah.
lot, and I think that there are a lot of invisible ways that it happens, that we're not always aware of.
Yeah.
But it could be significant.
Yeah.
In the way it impacts.
I love this connection. I hope this is just the beginning of like the connections we're making on this, because it would be fascinating to play with this more.
Well, and I think that we can revisit this.
Yeah.
And probably should revisit this.
Right.
So I suppose with this, if I have anything to close or share with, it's one, visit our website. I'm going to put the information below and experience these decks.
Ooh, cool. Yeah.
But really have conversations, read things, read into things, read people, read with people.
Yeah.
And see what you find.
Yeah.
You can be surprised what happens with that. I don't know if you have any other closing.
That's so fun.
things.
I love that.
See
you down the rabbit hole, everybody.
Well, thanks for joining me today.
I love that.
Yeah, cheers.
Love ya.